What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. Today's guest is Trevor Gordon Hall. Trevor is a fingerstyle guitarist that writes amazing instrumental music and has toured all over the world with artists like John Mayer, Steve Miller, Andy McKee, Dar Williams, Phil Keaggy, and a bunch more. He's been rated one of the top 30 guitarists in the world under 30 years of age by Acoustic Guitar magazine and has been featured on NPR, NBC, PBS, you name it. And before you listen to this episode, if you can, I'd urge you to quick look him up on Spotify or YouTube to check out his music because, one, it'll blow you away, and two, it'll give you some context to some of the stuff we end up talking about. We covered a ton in this conversation. We went through some of the history of Trevor's songwriting career, the ups and downs and inspirations and tensions and what it's like to balance stuff like touring with family and social media and still finding time to live in the moment. So really just a mess of fascinating stuff. I'll have Trevor's music linked in the show notes, but like I said, just give a quick search for his stuff, and I promise you won't regret it. He's one of the best musicians I've ever had the pleasure of talking to, and just an overall awesome guy. So I hope you enjoy our little chat. Now let's get into what's really good. And we're live. Trevor Gordon Hall, thanks for coming on the podcast.
What's up? Thanks for having me.
So we met for the very first time, I want to say last year when we did that video session.
Yes, at the record store.
Right?
Yeah.
Super cool, which is really weird because I think I was telling you then how like a few years ago I came across your music on YouTube. And I had no idea that you lived locally, and like the whole Kalimbatar.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I had like shared your videos with a bunch of friends of mine. Like, look at this guy and his style of playing guitar. I've never seen anything like this. And then I think you're friends with the guys in Pompton Lakes.
Yes,
Jeff
I
Martin.
was just gonna say, yeah.
So then I was talking to them one time. Yeah, and they were like, "Oh yeah, he went to our church or whatever." And I was like,
Yep.
"What? Like this is."
I went to school with a couple of guys in Pompton Lakes as well.
Okay.
And then we all went to the same church, and so lovely dudes, love them.
Yeah, they're so nice, man. So cool. So just to I guess jump off here for people who may not know as much about you, I'll have given a intro just about like what you do and all that before the podcast, but like what got you into songwriting growing up, and can you describe a little bit about the type of songwriting that you do, since it's not really something that as many people are familiar with?
Sure. It's kind of a evolving thing. I'm always trying to write better and better songs. When I was a kid, I was really interested in I didn't want to practice piano, but I loved when I would hear a theme on TV or in a movie, and I'd go to the piano and I would just kind of like noodle around and figure it out. And there's a I don't know, like if it's a spark in the mind, or like I get this feeling almost like deep in my chest of excitement that still to this day I still have that feeling. But I remember the first time I got it is when I was making the sound of what I heard.
Figured it out. Yeah.
When I heard it on the movie, and that's an exciting thing. I love that feeling. So I kind of just like part of my process, which is always changing. If I was asked that question a couple years ago, I would probably have like a real pat answer. Well, this is what I did. Now it's like, man, I don't know. I'm a beginner at the frontiers every song. I'm always trying to figure out, okay, what's something new, what's something fresh, But I like to dive into studying, music form or music theory, and just trying to expand my vocabulary. And then when it comes time, or I get inspired by something, then I sort of throw all of that out and just chase that feeling. I chase that feeling that I initially got, that I always, because I want to make sure every note that I put into a song is something I really connect with. It's not just noise. It's not just, I think some guy mentioned something really fascinating. I think he was talking not about the streaming era, but about like MP3s, that his job is not to make ambient noise for multitaskers. Like, this is an active, engaging
Right.
thing, you know? And so
Right.
I've always experienced music that way. And whether people listen to my music passively or actively, you know, that's not up to me, but I know that I experience it as a very active thing. So I want to be connected and present. Every musical decision, do I believe in it? You know, does it speak something? So I always say, like, you know, my work is very, it's, I guess, like autobiographical. Like, I'm always trying to, like, you know, figure out my place in the world and my life experiences and channel all of that in. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, right,
or is too
totally.
vague.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you can almost tell when you go to a show and you're watching someone, either whether it's play their guitar or sing their song, you can tell if they're feeling it,
Yeah,
you know, and you want to make, like, if they're feeling it, then there's a very strong chance that the audience is going to feel it as well. Whereas
Absolutely.
if they're not feeling it, there's more of that disconnect there, and it's harder to get, you know, hold of the audience's heartstrings or their minds or whatever part of them you're trying to captivate. So
Totally.
it's really interesting to hear that that's something that you always go back to the drawing board with, because I know personally for me, even there's times when I'm writing a song, and, you know, I've been, I guess, actively, passively, whatever, like actively writing for maybe 8 years now, and there's times when I start at the drawing board and I come up with a lyric that I really like or a melody that I like, and I write it down or I start working through it, but my heart's not really in it. It just kind of works.
Yeah.
And then as you start to go down the road of progressing into that song, maybe like 5-6 drafts in, you really realize this isn't connecting at all. And
Yeah.
it sounded like it worked, and now I'm basically just going to have to put it on the back burner for maybe later, because if I try to play this in front of someone else, I can't convince myself that it's the thing that I want it to be. So how am I going to convince an audience member to do that?
Right.
So yeah, so I'm with you, man. How do you describe the style that you play? Like, because it isn't something like this. It's that acoustic and electric instrumental type of thing is not something that a lot of people are used to seeing.
Right. I guess it kind of gets lumped into, it's called fingerstyle guitar, which is another umbrella term that doesn't describe anything except how it's played, because fingerstyle,
it's like calling something indie.
Right. What does that mean? At one point, maybe it did mean something, but now it's kind of like, it can cover jazz, classical, folk. You know, you can do singer-songwriters that also do, you know, fingerstyle. The way that I view fingerstyle, I grew up listening to guys like Michael Hedges, who was kind of a real pioneer in the style, and a lot of guys on this label called Windham Hill, and that was a really big influence for me. And what I loved about that era of when the style kind of launched is it was not a style in and of itself. It was the meeting place of all these different styles, and that's what made it so cool and accessible. So Michael Hedges, I think at his peak, was playing for a couple thousand people, and he had a huge committed fan base, and he would do some singing, but he did a lot of instrumental. You know, he was really known.
Was that the draw?
Yeah, he was really known for being just a brilliant writer, and he played guitar. And so growing up with his textures in my mind, and I loved, like, Phil Keaggy. I grew up listening to him. All of the, like, I guess it's kind of, you know, it's a solo act with, I'm covering the bass lines, the melody, the harmony, you know, percussion, like just doing all of that as one event. That's really exciting to me. And there are times when it's been a little bit more hip in the public's eye, and not, like, a couple years ago, I had a friend who did really well on YouTube, and then a lot of friends, I was on this label called Candy Rat Records,
right.
And a lot of those guys started this kind of new, it's sort of like just reignited fingerstyle guitar again, you know. So it kind of, like, you know, comes and goes, but in the end, it's a real, I always call the fingerstyle community a sort of, like, you know, community of loners. Like, everyone is used to kind of, like, you know, you have this, like, deep reflective, you're alone in your room, you're exploring your instrument, and you're trying to figure out how to play new things, and you're writing melodies, and then you all get together, and sometimes we'll do tours, and I just find it a really cool style that just brings so many different things together. So I keep catching myself calling it a style, but I want to say it's more of a sort of community, you know.
Right. Yeah, I remember my first. You're talking about how it kind of waves up and down in popularity. I remember my first exposure to the style was probably Andy McKee.
Okay.
I think so. I remember when his video, I'm pretty sure it was Driftin', went viral. Whatever year that was. I remember a lot of people, even in my school, because I would have been in 8th or 9th grade, I want to say, and people were sharing it like, "Oh, this is so cool. We've never seen this before." Yeah. So it is interesting how someone does something like that, where he like added that it was a sort of intense percussion into the guitar, and like for the lay person who was not like commonly exposed to that type of style, it's interesting how it rallies people in the sort of viral sense where everybody wants to talk about it. So yeah, you kind of get those moments where someone's experimenting with something. Like I remember one of those ones for you a couple years ago, which I also mentioned the last time we saw each other at that Matone session, was the song that you do where the tag of the song is based off of you tuning the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something I had never seen before. Like, I don't know, was that done before? Like, did you get that from someone else, or?
There's a bass player named Michael Manring who used to play with Michael Hedges years ago.
Okay.
And he invented this bass that has these, they're called hypertuners, and they're very similar to what Earl Scruggs used to use on banjos way back in the day, and I think the 50s and 60s. And you can kind of like set where the next note is, and then as soon as you hit it, it pops up to the next note and then back down.
Wow.
And Michael said he could actually get up to like a fifth interval, which means he could do not just the next note, like he could jump up pretty high and then come back, because there's kind of these little screws and it sets where it goes to.
That's amazing.
So I looked into those, and they were like $200 per tuner. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. I had this idea for this tune, and I was like, I wanted to do this song where I was just exploring the tuning stuff. So I was like, well, I'll just buy some of those tuners, and they just didn't. I wasn't going to spend all that money for just an experiment. And then right around, so I just started trying to memorize. I would have a tuner right in front of me, and I would just tune normal tuners up and down, and I would just try to line and just sort of like train my mind to know what a whole step or a half step was.
It sounds exhausting. Like every guitar is different. Every guitar is different,
and every time you put strings on, the tuners are in a different...
it changes the tension too.
Changes the tension, the tuners are in a different direction. So as soon as you get used to it. So there was something about that I was kind of like, I want to transcend, I want to try to work to the point where I can transcend whatever strings are on, almost whatever guitar. I mean, I could do it on, I played that song on 2 or 3 guitars, but I wanted to like really, really learn how to do that. And then I have a friend in the UK named John Gomm, and he has the banjo tuners, and he's a brilliant player, and he had a tune go on, I think it was right before that video was going to get posted. It was called Passion Flower, which that was a big viral hit and which is a beautiful tune. And so I, when I released my tune, it was, I don't know, maybe a month later or so, I can't remember exactly. Then I remember thinking, like, you know what, John just kills at doing the tuning thing. I'm just going to let him have it. I'm going to go in another direction,
Okay.
But that's the cool thing about the fingerstyle scene. Like, a lot of people have just kind of like influenced each other, and, oh, he's doing this, let me try this. And, some of them it's competition, but for the most part, it's kind of like everyone is like really supportive of each other. And that's the way it should be,
Yeah, that's so cool. So what's it like internally in that scene then, when it comes to that type of thing, where it's almost you're trying to not out innovate in the sense like you're saying, where you're not trying to like beat out somebody else, but like when you're trying to come up with the next thing that's going to capture someone's attention, is that something that is prized in this community? Because like when you think in contrast to general songwriting, where people have melody with their voices, and then there's the lyrical aspect, and then people add in different multiple instrument tones, and there's bands and full productions, and there's all these different factors that, like, if you're a songwriter and you start out just you and your acoustic, maybe you release an album like that, and then your next album you add piano and bass, and the next album you add drums and all that. So what is it like to not just retain attention from fans, but kind of continually grow in the creative process? And is it more difficult, you think, or is it?
I think it is, because it can feel like a pretty limited palette. Like if it's a guy and a guitar and that's it, that can feel a little bit like, all right, does that work for one album? Maybe
Yeah.
two,
Yeah.
maybe three, you know? But what I love about it is, you know, there's sort of a freedom in the crazy structure of it. You only have 6 strings. You only have one guy doing this. You can do some looping, but most of the guys, it's very much like, what can you do live?
Yeah.
You know,
Purist.
yeah. And there's something about that's really, really cool. And I think I don't find it harder to be inspired to keep going, but I do feel like I want to have other sides of my playing that aren't the solo acoustic thing.
Right.
To continue to grow. So I did an electric guitar record a couple years ago, and I play electric guitar for a singer named Dar Williams for a little bit, sometimes on the road, and I just did a record with a great singer-songwriter, piano player, string arranger in London. And so, like, I love having another side of my playing kind of working and hopefully coming to fruition, but I love the sort of strict simplicity of the acoustic guitar. And there's, you know, when I play live, there's this moment when I walk on stage and, you know, I plug in my guitar and I have, you know, the guitar kalimba and I have all these inputs, so it takes forever to put all these wires in. And there's this moment of silence when the audience is ready and I haven't started the first sound yet. That is like, this is pretty cool. That a full band has a different energy when they start, but a solo artist, like the very next event that has to happen is just one guy and a guitar filling the room with sound. That used to cripple me. That I was like, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can handle this. Yeah. But now I just love that moment so much. I love to just silence and then you just, you know, fill the room with all of these sounds. You know, I've become really, really in love with that.
It's such an intimate thing, and it is wild when you get to that point of overcoming, I guess, the nerves and the ego and all that. You can really soak in the moment of being in front of hundreds or thousands of people and realizing that they're all there to listen to what you're about to do, and you're about to share this moment, whereas, it's just a different energy when it's a band, because when it's a band, it's more, I think, about the energy of the room. Like, the room sort of creates this vibrant, it's almost like the energy of the crowd bounces off the singer and the people on stage. There's like a lot of performance. There's a lot of like movement and just different moving pieces where it's like you got the adrenaline almost going up further, you know, whereas with a solo performance, it's about stillness and intimacy and people listening.
You can feel in the room, people are like, okay, what's he
like, are we allowed to talk?
Yeah.
Like,
but I used to, I would have this dilemma as a performer when I would get up on stage. Do I sort of try to take charge of the energy in the room, or do I respond to the energy of the room? And now that was a really big dilemma for me because, you know, I am a lifelong off the charts introvert. So to get on stage and play solo instrumental music is always this sort of like, it's scraping up against my own personal boundaries.
Yeah,
but
to
then
demand attention from people.
I don't know if it's demand attention, but like invite everybody to share a moment together.
Yeah.
Like, how can we all just cut off everything else in our life and do that? Because I don't want to be listened to. I've prepared moments to be shared, to be experienced, you know? So I don't want to get up and here's this thing I practice. No, I'm very much like all of us, you know, came here. Now we're present in this one room and let's all share this together.
It sounds like you'd be terrible at trying to demand attention like a bar playing, right?
Those are the worst. And I've done those so long and I cut my teeth playing a lot of places in Philly. And that was a really tough thing for me because I always had the pressure to play louder.
Right.
Play louder.
Exactly.
Play
you gotta
upbeat.
beat the bar.
Beat the bar. And I was playing at the World Cafe, my gosh, maybe 10, 11 years ago, something like that. And I was playing upstairs and it was one of those, like, I don't know if it's a showcase or whatever, but or I was opening up for a friend's band or something. And I remember just like driving louder and louder and louder. And then there's a song that I wasn't performing live at that time. And it's a very just kind of like, it's just a chill melody. And I played that and I actually could hear the whole room dial down until I got almost to when I was like completely silent, and I ended it. And I was like, this moment right here proves that I don't have to feel that pressure to always be this like really upbeat. When there's a full band on a stage, there is an energy that will, even if they're playing chill music, there is a sort of live energy that's almost expected. Or, with a solo artist, like I feel like if I start like low, then anywhere I go is going to feel massive. And you know what I mean? I feel like I have a such better advantage than a band to really control dynamics and energy in the room,
Yeah, it's so true. So looking back, kind of like moving backwards a little bit from what we've been talking about here, what were some of the, I guess, the big breaks early on for you in success? Because you're one of the few people that I know personally, at least, that's able to make a career off of what you do musically. You're living the scene dream. Like where kids like me, we growing up, a lot of parents, like I've told myself, told friends of mine, this is just something you're never going to make money doing.
Right.
It's a really difficult and not a very consistent career field to take seriously. So what was it like growing up for you, trying to get in, like making this more of a lucrative thing? And what were some of the breaks early on that got you to where you are?
It's a good question. I think initially, I started. It's hard to know how far back to go, but I'll just start in around 2008 because that's when I graduated college in 2007.
Okay.
I got married a month after, and I started working at a guitar store, and I was selling guitars, and I was just like, no.
What am I doing?
What am I doing? And I found there was one day I was explaining to this, so you're a music salesman, so you have to, and I love the people that I was working with. It was just, wasn't the right job for me. And they would tell you that too here. They'd say, he was bad at sales. Trevor was really bad at sales. But I remember there was one day I was explaining to a kid the tonal difference between a metal and a plastic kazoo. And I thought, what am I doing?
This kid does not give a crap. This kid's like, what are you?
Yeah. I was just like, what am I doing? So I ended up, and those were, the long sales hours. I was playing a couple shows around the area, just trying to do that, but it was tough to kind of juggle the hours or whatever. So then I switched from sales to teaching there, and I was also teaching at a couple other places, just teaching guitar lessons. And then I started recording with a producer in New Jersey who got me connected with this guy named Joe Nicolo, who started Rough House Records back in the 80s. And so I think their first act they signed was Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff.
Get
and
out.
Then they did like Criss Cross, Lauryn Hill, the Fugees, Cypress Hill. And so this guy was like this stacked like resume. I'm still very close friends with him now. And he sold a lot of records in that scene, but he's also just a music lover. So he had worked with James Taylor and Billy Joel. He did like the River of Dreams album.
Jeez.
And so when he said he was starting a new label, so he had sold Rough House, and then he started a movie company, and then he was going to get back into the music business. And he said that he wanted I would be the first artist on this new label. And I'm, looking at his resume, I'm like, what in the world would you want anything to do with some weird acoustic guitar, solo acoustic guitar or whatever? But he's just a huge fan of music. And so that kind of like, I went into this really, really awesome studio in Philly, and I recorded a solo record there, and then I did a Christmas record. And so we did two projects there. And I just learned so much, not just about the business, but how to make a record, how to calm your nerves, like, just the whole process I learned. And what was great is his name's Joe Nicolo, and he's got a identical twin brother named Phil Nicolo. They're so like famous around the Philly area, but they did so much great things for the scene, but they're just lovely, lovely human beings.
That's awesome.
They never made me feel like, what, you don't know this? Or like, this is how it works in the biz. It was always, 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 always just like, well, here's how we did it. What do you think? What do you think? And so they let me sit behind the controls sometimes, and, well, let me dial with the reverb. Let me try this. And I learned a ton, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for that experience. And then they, once we launched those records, then I think we had like maybe 2 years trying to promote those. And then I ended up landing on Candy Rat Records, and that was a really good that was a really good situation. Candy Rat had like Andy McKee, Antoine Dufour, and Don Ross, and a lot of really, really great players in that scene.
Yeah, in your genre.
Yeah, and so, Joe was very supportive, like, maybe because they were starting to focus a little bit more on this R&B act, and they were like, you're always going to be our heart and soul act, but, maybe the Candy Rat will be a better place for you.
Yeah.
So I felt like, to answer your question, that big break was having someone that had such a stacked resume treat my project like something that was valuable despite there was no major payoff for it. Mm-hmm. And I think, in the end, they didn't make a ton of money, but like I'm still very close with them, and they still tell me they listen to the records, routinely. And so like there's that real human connection thing that made me, you hear all those fat white guy with a cigar in the music business,
right.
like just and they just weren't that at all. They were just really great. And that I still, if I have questions, I'll still call them up and Joe and Phil, and just try to talk through, hey, I came across this. And so that was a big deal. And I think after I got to Candy Rat, YouTube, so I released my first record with them. Actually only did one record with them in 2011. And then from there, I just was like, anything that was happening on YouTube, anything that was happening anywhere else, I want to try to get on the road.
Right.
I got to get on the road as soon as I can. And so I spent quite a few years just losing money, and then coming home and teaching lessons, and then, to afford, you can go back out on the road a little bit, and then coming back. And so I don't know if there's ever, like, when I look back, there are moments where I'm like, okay, this was a high point where this seemed to be a very clear thought to just keep going in a certain direction, but I don't know if there was ever a specific break.
Yeah, never like an aha, like this is the thing.
Yeah, because
right?
I watched some other acts, and I always had that perception. I don't know exactly where it comes from. I may have read it somewhere that as fast as you shoot up in the music business, you can almost fall twice as fast. And I was, I'm never going to be a major pop act, but it's possible for me to have a really good relationship with fans for life, and I can make a living. And that I'm much more content with that than trying to amass as many people as possible.
Yeah, have that like #1 Billboard chart song, and then you're just only known for that.
That's the kiss of death.
Yeah,
the kiss of death.
That's the call me maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And then you immediately have a shelf life.
Yeah.
And anything, like your career is in decline from the moment it's at its highest.
Right.
I played a gig in New York with this other great guitar player named Mike Dawes, and you remember that song by Gautier, Somebody I Used to Know.
Yes, of course.
So he was at the gig, and so Mike was friends
Gautier
with
was
him.
at the
Gautier
gig.
was at the gig. Wow. So we hung out just a little bit afterwards, and he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. But the fascinating thing is, I think that after all of the success of that, he wasn't trying to just continue to capitalize. I don't know what he did, if he recorded another record soon after that, but I remember him saying that he moved back to Australia and he got back to a band back together that he played in high school. He played drums, and they just kind of, did a tour around dive bars.
Oh, wow.
Because he wanted to just get back to, what it was really about.
Yeah.
And
didn't he record that in his garage or something?
Yeah.
He that was like he did that whole thing, very low budget. And it was not like this, we signed this pop star. And,
No.
Yeah.
So that's like, he wasn't trying to chase some major thing. And then once he got it, there's always the pressure to maintain. And he was like, he's in, not he's in control of inspirations, but he's kind of in control of how he responds to the pressures of the business. And I respected that. Every other person in the business would say that that's, career suicide, but like that saved him, that allowed him. And so, I keep getting these little nuggets along the way that like, I don't really want to have some huge thing. Like it's always better to be an up and coming than to be a once was.
Right.
So every year I'm just building a little bit more, hit new markets, get to see some new countries, little fan base, more and more and more. And I pay the bills while I'm doing it. And I also get to have a decent amount of time at home to continue to create that sounds so much better than anything on a top 40. Because I've seen the pressure that goes with those people. I don't want that.
Yeah.
You know.
It's really interesting hearing just the way you talk about this. It's striking that it seems that there's a contrast between what you're describing here, which is more of that hustle mindset. Like, you got to get in at the right time. You got to make the right music, the right decisions, the right connections. And I'm sure we both know people who have done that. You know, there's a certain pathway where, you know, these people that get into the music scene, whether they want to be a pop singer or a rock star, whatever it is, there's a path to that success, that place of success, and they have to know the right producers and the right people who prop them up, and it becomes this very consumer-driven narrative where you know, you go through then your career using the people that you meet as building blocks in a way, and it's, I guess it kind of, I don't know, like I guess there's something to be said about that, because I feel like some people balance that mindset maybe better than others. Some people like go that route and they've still maintained good relationships and they're happy. I'm sure that's the case for some people, but it seems like what you're saying is this more, and it seems like a lot of it has to do with that first producer from Philly, where the way you were describing how he taught you was very open, and it was not very judgmental or looking down the nose like, oh, you didn't know this, or like why would you ever do it this way, which is I think you mentioned like the stereotype of the producer. That's what most people think about when you see like in pop culture, when you see the movies about like you know, some band coming up in the 80s and the 90s, and then that their stereotypical producer who's super angry and just yelling at the people. I think it's interesting how the teacher, whoever it might be, in a lot of ways frames the mindset then, or molds the mindset of the student in that way, because just the way you describe them and this whole process, it's with a very open hand. It's very, you know, I'm open to learning. You know, maybe it would have gone this direction, that would have been okay. Like I went here. It was never about like the money here. Like I'm very content with this, and you're very like okay with it just being what it is. Which is, I think, most people who grow up looking to become successful, they chase so hard that you lose. Like you're saying, this guy, he kind of went out on a limb for you initially. Like it wasn't in his style wheelhouse. It wasn't this, oh, I'm going to make bank off this kid type of thing. Like he saw you were talented, saw you were probably a good person, wanted to work with you, and now it's paid dividends in not just, I mean, like you said, like he made some money, but it's more paid dividends in like the relationship. Like it's paying it forward. And now you're a type of person who is, I think, would offer that same type of grace and character, because you're a teacher still. Like you're still teaching kids. So now that gives you the opportunity to instill that same mindset into dozens, if not hundreds, of other kids. You know,
I feel like what was, you know, back then I wasn't sure if anything I was doing was good. I just knew that I really believed in it. Right. And to have him really affirm my path helped me continue to just keep going. So that, like, I really feel that a lot. And I've sort of backed off teaching. You know, I still do a little bit, but as of this fall, I kind of like have dropped off a lot of my the teaching too much, and I'm focusing more on have, you know, more travel stuff coming up. I want to find as many ways as possible to try to, like, you know, if it's through teaching or if it is through you know, meeting people on the road, or like I want to be able to help people feel affirmed in whatever path that they feel they want to go and may not have the confidence or affirmation to do that, you know?
Because that means so much when an artist comes up to like an aspiring artist, you know, and gives like a word of wisdom or pat on the back. Like we've all been there where you've been at a show and someone that you really looked up to or were really looking forward to see, and they take the time to even just like say, like, oh, like, hey, like, oh, you're a musician? That's so cool. It could be something that simple, and that you go home with that and you tell all your friends, and it's just like this, it lights a fire. It has the potential to do that, you know?
I think in this business, it's very easy. I don't even want to call it, I hate saying that, in this business.
Right.
Just delete that part.
Delete it.
Just think that, like, there's always the tendency to want to be, you know, super ambitious and to see everybody you meet as a stepping stone. Yeah. And then all of your personal relationships become business contacts, and you're always talking to them with an agenda. and I've watched that happen to enough people. I'm like, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, I legitimately, it happens to be good business, but I don't do it for that. But I legitimately love meeting new people.
Yeah.
I love having good conversations. And now the more I travel, I love just kind of like sending a quick message to a friend I met in Italy. How you doing? And, you know, and then next time we come back through, I'll, you know, maybe they'll book a gig, maybe not, or maybe we'll, you know, whoever I meet on the road, I just love, you know, just amassing this wealth of beautiful people and experiences, you know?
It's so interesting to think about how much of that is temperamental, unfortunately, for some people, because I feel the same way with what I do, working on social media, obviously not comparing tit for tat, but when I work on social through different brand accounts, you have the opportunity, you have a lot of random people online commenting and DMing you, and it's interesting how many of them just want to talk. Like, they're just looking for someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And I'm through the voice of a brand, and
so you can't quite,
but I can. I do.
Oh,
There's certain walls up, obviously.
Sure.
Like, you can't like completely tear down the wall and reveal. You know, you can't. There's certain things that people have messaged me where I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, people have shared like severe mental health problems and relationship problems and personal issues that I'm like, I am a brand. Like, I'm not the person to go to here. But it is interesting how, from my shoes, like where I sit in this job, it's very easy to dismiss most of that, because when it comes to the consumer angle of what I do, a lot of it's sales driven. So I mean, similarly to what you're talking about, like from a careerist perspective, there's hundreds and hundreds of people who message or comment on a daily basis that, one, I can look at and say, you're never going to buy this product, so I don't need to interact with you. Or two, it's a DM, so this is like never going to see the surface anyway, so what dividends am I actually playing to this random person DMing me? Or whatever, name your factor. I don't know how many factors. I'm naming 1, 2, whatever. It could be a bunch of factors, but all that to say, it's like, from my personality, I enjoy the interaction. Like, I enjoy the relationship, and I don't want it to become, for as much as I know this is my job. It's my job to, you know, represent this brand and to take care of it and to you know, whatever, like promote the product and all that. Like, that's all part of it. But for myself personally, like from like a personal, ethical, temperamental perspective, you know, I wouldn't be able to just push sell all day if I didn't have the opportunity to really develop some cool relationships with people through it. But I think what you're saying, like, it can't be, people get stuck in that stepping stone mindset where it's just connections, it's just networking, and it's not sustainable. Like, especially into old age, like when you get a family and all that, you realize, where are my friends? Like,
well, I think that's a really good short-term strategy, but I have yet to see, you know, people that I know personally who have done that, for them to have a good sort of long-term thing, you know? I've heard some people say, like, you know, I don't want to just be a good artist, I want to be good. And I think that's a really good thing, you know, to be good with people, to be kind, and to realize that, you know, our time on this planet is so short, and that makes every moment we do have so precious. So if I'm in you know, another country and I'm meeting somebody, or, you know, they came to the gig, or like, I just love the fact that for whatever reason they came to the gig, I'm really happy, you know, and there's something so exciting about meeting new people to me, you know?
Yeah.
And whether, you know, if that ever does, if they come back to the gig or if they buy a CD or not, like I you know, maybe I do feel the pressure, you know, with, I have a daughter, you know, I'm married, I have a daughter. And so, like, there are financial strains, but at the end of the day, like, I try to not bring all of those anxieties into those moments. It's just a human to human connection, you know?
Yeah, because it'll poison it, like, over time.
Totally.
That just poisons if it all does become this transactional conversation that you're having with somebody. Like, that's just, it's such a weird balance in this world, especially nowadays, where there's just so many options for everything. You know, like, put table music a second. Like, think about anything. Like, when you go to the store or you're going on YouTube to find content, there's an endless stream of bloggers, vloggers, you know, musicians, whatever it might be, that you can just absorb their content in some capacity. So when you're interacting with somebody one-on-one, there is that weird balance of, you want them to like you because you need support on some level, but at the same time, we're at a time in history where you can't really force that onto anybody because
Right.
they'll just find it somewhere else.
Right.
Like, especially like we're doing a podcast right now. Podcasts are free.
Yep.
So it's like this whole thing where just like social media,
Yep.
like there's always going to be another platform. People
Yep.
are always going to pay for advertising to keep these things free for the everyday person. So how do you compete with that? Like, you
Yeah.
have to really be your best self and make it about, I guess a deeper thing than just selling
Yep.
whatever it is that you're doing.
Yep.
Yeah. So like what were some of the things you talked a little bit about, some like highs and lows? Like, were there, I think something that a lot of people are interested in when they get into, like, for lack of a better word, success story, like someone who's successful in whatever it is they do. Like, what were some of the super low points that you experienced? Like, was there one that stood out to you when you were going through this that
I've had a bunch. Oh.
Because people are always interested in like how do you deal with that? Because
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you're at, they're always coming.
Yeah.
Like they come in waves, and that's such an important thing in how to stay stable
Yeah.
in this line of work.
There was an interview with Ringo. It's on the Beatles anthology that was recorded back in the 90s. It's beautiful. I have it's like an 8 DVD set or whatever. And on there, Ringo, and I'm not going to remember the name of the theater, but Ringo said something. I think the interviewer asked him, like, all of the success, did you know what was coming?
Yeah.
When the Beatles started, did you know what was coming? And he said, all I wanted to do is play, I think it was the Crown Theater in Liverpool. All I wanted to do is play the Crown Theater. And then I played that. And everything else was just icing on the cake. Everything else was just an added bonus. And I thought, that's the healthiest view of success you could have.
Right.
And of course, he went on to, it's the Beatles. It's as legendary as possible. But that really stuck in my mind as like, okay, if I have a very clear, defined understanding of what success is to me, then anything else is an added bonus. And so I sort of defined it as, if I can make a living playing music that I enjoy, whatever, and I keep my overhead as low as possible, then I'm successful. And the times that have been really, really low are when I can't get to that, or it's been a struggle to get to that point. So, years ago I was teaching maybe 50 students a week, and then then taking a break from that to do tour stuff. And so, and there was the very first few tours I did in the UK. There was one. The first tour I did in Europe, I went to Italy, and that was fantastic. And that sort of was like, this is amazing. I can't wait to, go everywhere.
Of course, yeah.
And then I went to the UK, and I had, there was a couple of gigs, and I'm new at this, as in like I was doing booking and promotion, and I was touring with another guitar player, and there was one place in Bath, England, beautiful venue, and it's in this old church. And we walked in, and everywhere we go, posters everywhere. And I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And you just get a good vibe walking around town. The food's great. And Bath is just a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go, it's fantastic. And we do the sound check. Perfect. Sound is awesome. This is going to be a great show. And not one person came to the gig.
Not one person?
Not one. Not one.
What?
And so the promoter came up and said, well, okay, it's a little bit of an off night because I get, it's a university town, so classes start tomorrow, so I guess maybe that affected it, but all of what you see on social media of like, oh my God, people will promote like, I'm in Bath, England, look at my life, it's so, and I was standing there just thinking like, really? Not one?
Yeah.
Not one person. And, obviously there were some mistakes that I made, and I've learned a ton about touring and, all of that. I've learned a ton. But that was like a real low point where my friend and I went back to the hotel, and we just kind of like sat there and we were like, wow, this sucks. Like that really does not feel good. And I've had a few of those. And then I heard, oh my gosh, I think it was, there was a huge band that had, they pull thousands, and they went to play in New Orleans one year, just a couple years ago, and I think they only had 20 people there, or something like that, for a band that pulls thousands usually. Yeah. And so it was one of those like, oh, okay, so this is part of it. There are lows built into this thing.
Yeah, it happens to everybody. Yeah.
So that was kind of like a big thing for me. I've had others. similar to that, or like, I think that something is going to happen, and then I started working with a manager who was a real great manager, and then that kind of dissolved, and that was a real low because it was right before my daughter was going to be born, and I had all of this work on the horizon, and then I sort of stopped. Right now I'm kind of one-man operation. I do everything from booking to kind of operating my own. I'm kind of my own label. I kind of do almost everything.
Yeah.
And I was, just sort of took the pedal off the metal with that stuff. And then when that dissolved and I didn't go into the management thing with him, I think it was maybe 7, 8 months or something like that. Then that was really low, and I had to, regain back. So I feel like I'm always trying to figure out, in those lowest moments, dig deep. What are the roots of why I do this? Yeah. And make sure that I stay in touch with that instead of any kind of external, like, okay, so I can post, something on Facebook of here are all the places I'm visiting, and that can make me feel really good, or that I'm, trying to. We all subconsciously show off a little bit on social media.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's social.
And now that just sort of crushed all of that.
Right.
I still do all the social media stuff because I find it fun. I want to try to find a way to like maintain some sort of personal character or integrity with it, but I do enjoy doing all of that. But it really kind of changed the relationship of what does it mean to be in a career. And I'm not in this to sell a perception of success, because there's always going to be bumps and scrapes. And I remember I played a show with Phil Keaggy, who was like my idol growing. He's the reason I started playing guitar. And I can't remember when, some years back. And I went from there the next day to teaching, and this kid came in and he said, "Do you know this Metallica song?" And I said, "No, I don't know that one." He's like, "Do you know this AC/DC song?" I said, "No, I don't." And he's like, "Well, geez, do you know anything?" And I remember, like, that sticks in my mind as one of those, like, I could have just, do you have any idea who Phil Keaggy, whatever.
Right.
And I this tendency, and that just, like, brings up so many fascinating moments that I have like that, where I'm like, okay, like, this is constantly going to be something I have to deal with. There's never going to not be lows.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think that's what I'm trying to get at. There's never going to not be lows. And the best principle I've learned in my life and in the music business over the last however many years is that however it is right now, it will never stay like that.
Right.
If it's good, it's going to get worse. If it's bad, it's going to get a little bit better. But however it is, it's never going to stay like that. And so that sort of has forced an equilibrium. That sort of has forced me to dig deep and say, why do I do this? Can I still pay my bills? I want to make sure I do that. Yeah. But why do I do this? Why do I do this? And that is a good question to not really be answered, but continually deepened.
Yeah, staying in that tension. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear this from someone who is using their passion as like the driver for their career for people. Because I think there's that notion that people have just generally that whatever you're passionate about, don't make it your career, because then you'll hate it. You'll become hate it. Sure. Yeah. So I think it's interesting I'm interested to know, with that process of like you're talking about with this, when the lows are low and when the expectations aren't met and you deal with that disappointment, do you feel, what do you think the weight of that would be comparable to if this wasn't your full-time gig? Like, is it astronomical in that sense, like compared to somebody like somebody like myself? Like, I stopped trying to, I guess, hustle my way musically a couple years ago, and in my mind up to a couple years ago I was thinking, I'm gonna keep going, I'm gonna make this career wise. Stop doing it. Since then, still do musical endeavors, but it's not my main thing. So because of that, spreading the eggs, I guess, like that type of mindset. Like, if something goes bad musically, I don't feel the weight of that the same way, which I think is what people tend to equate when they talk about that. Like, don't make your passion your career, because when it goes down, it really you goes down. Yeah. So like what do you feel that's been like the past few years? And like, I guess what would you say to someone who's thinking about doing it?
I would say probably, like, as hard as it is to not tie your self-worth into your passion, So if I have something that does go down, or I spent 3 years working on Clair de Lune, from Claude Debussy, this brilliant piano piece, and I play this crazy instrument called a Kalimbatar. So after I had designed and got like all these Kalimbatars built, I finally got the one that I thought rang just perfect.
Right.
And I took 3 years trying to figure out how to arrange a classical piano piece for guitar and kalimba, and I finally did it. And I recorded it, and I did a video, and I was just so excited because it felt like if I died tomorrow, I will, in my final moments, be like, well, I did Clair de Lune, so that feels pretty good, Posted it, nobody cared. No, it was just one of those, like, it just flopped, I just got I get like these, daily metric, like how each of the tracks are doing, and I think it went on some chart in El Salvador on the classical charts or something like that, but this is the first time I've seen any kind of anything from that.
Jeez, 3 years.
Yeah, and so I remember in that moment thinking like just being really upset or taking that personally, but that was a lesson I learned. Like I can't put my self-worth just on this. Like my self-worth is independent of what the external rewards are for my career. Right now, I have this shed in the back of my house, and I walk out of there early in the morning, and I go to the shed, and I go to work. I go to work, and I practice, and I spend time with my guitar. Those are the moments when I feel like this is why I do this, instead of the moment of creating, the moment of working and laboring over Clair de Lune is so much more important and valuable to me. And somehow I throw all of that away in hopes that I'll get lots of digits by the YouTube count.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's all the ego.
Yeah,
that's what it is for people.
So much of that.
Like when you put so much time into something like that, whether it's conscious or subconscious, you want and need people to admire you for it.
Yep.
And that's such a weird thing to think about, because I think we all, I shouldn't say we all, most decent people who put themselves out there in some capacity in the world, they put their work out there in some capacity, they don't think about this consciously. They're not going day to day thinking, oh, I need respect from people, I need attention from people. But when it comes down to something that you've produced that you really care about, that you put the time into, and then it does flop and it doesn't get that attention, you realize how much you actually crave it. Because it's not, obviously, like there's a range, like you're someone who's a little bit more chill and introverted, like you've been saying, and there's some people who are ego maniacs, like super extroverts, and they have to put everything on the internet. They have to put everything into their work, and when it's shut down or rejected, they lose everything. Yeah. So there's definitely a sliding scale, but
for sure,
I think anyone who puts that time in and puts the work out, there is that expectation. No matter how much we all want to believe that we're purists and like, oh, I just do it for the love of it. Like you do. It comes from the passion, but when you commit all that time and energy to something and no one cares, it's you realize how your ego is tied in to those things.
And I think it's always been the case in humans for that to feel that, but now it's so tangible to see if it flopped or didn't, because we have likes and comments, and
social
we have
media.
Interaction. And I'm not saying like there are you can say so many good things or bad things about how all of that works out, but we should use all of that as a reflection. We should look in the mirror when we see those, like, what am I really doing this for? And I hope that years from now someone will discover Clair de Lune or say, oh, thanks for that, but at the end of the day, I know that it was just sort of like part of the path, and I just got to keep going. I got to keep waking up in the morning. I keep going to work, and those moments are what make me feel like this is why I'm on this planet, and I'm preparing, and I'm practicing, and I'm working, and following inspiration and all that, and that sort of keeps me going. So I would say to like anybody, like, there's always going to be the battle of the ego. Don't be seduced by it. Because it will always, always let you down. Yeah. Even in the moments when it's like you might be riding high, it's going to get worse. Yeah. And then it'll get better. Then it'll get worse again.
Right. You kind of got lucky because you, in the range of time that you started to find success, you were a little bit before the burst of social media. You were in like the Zanga, MySpace days and Facebook early on, but like in the past probably 5 years, I would say it's gotten exponentially to the point where it now controls so many people's lives, whereas before it was a piece of people's lives.
Right.
Now it's like front and center.
Right.
And it is interesting how the balance of like a lot of what you're talking about, like the hustle and like the story and moving through your passion and trying new things and going through the bumps in the road.
Yep.
A lot of that now is just directly tied into people's social media.
Right.
In a way, like you're saying, you can kind of choose to not project as much of it onto there because of the platform that you've already developed over the past decade or so of playing. Whereas a lot of people, even myself, like I find myself in this trap all the time where I have my Instagram, my Facebook, my Twitter, whatever, and with what I post on that, I have to constantly be evaluating how much of this is for just the self, like am I just looking for attention, how much of this is for my brand, like the products that I'm putting out there, and how much of it is just like anxious or bored or whatever, and I'm just looking for distraction to, you know, so there's like all these competing factors and they sort of tie in together because like you think like the selfie culture is one that gets talked about a lot, where it's like, oh, we're such a, like the younger generations, the self-obsessed generations where everybody's taking pictures of themselves. There's definitely that side of it where there's the people who just post for that, you know, attention, that gratification of whatever you like, adrenaline or serotonin burst you get, you know, from all that. But there's also, I think, this weird thing where some people do post, whether it's selfies or the gym pics or whatever, or even just pictures of themselves playing music from shows, whatever it is. Like it's self-oriented, but it's also building some type of brand presence, which is this weird like. So it's like it's all mixed together for some people nowadays, like where they like kids are growing up from the time they're 8, 10, 12 years old with social media. So a lot of like the process that you're talking about and how you kind of establish your passions and who you are and what you want to do, that's being done now through those platforms. Right. Really, so
that's a whole other...
It's a whole new world.
I delayed doing anything with Instagram because I thought it felt that way. It was like, you know, I got Facebook when it first started in 2005. I was in college when Facebook started. So it was like our thing, you know. And anytime I would put an event on Facebook, whoever said they were coming, I could always count on double.
Right.
Because it was always the way to spread the word.
The opposite now.
It is the exact opposite, you know? And so I came from that, and then I like some of the Instagram thing was like just throwing me off. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be like that. But I had enough friends who have done really well on Instagram who are like, you know, well, try this, and try to define what it is for yourself, you know? So for me, I started really getting, you know, doing more the Instagram thing around February of this year. And what I have loved about it is, number one, there's just fantastic players. And anyone who says like, oh, well, these younger kids aren't really, you know, whatever, like, forget it, man. There is amazing talent that I would not have discovered or known.
They're all sharing it on hashtags, and
it's cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool communities.
But the other thing is, like, I don't have, you know, I'm not releasing singles consistently. You know, I need to be releasing music more consistently. But Instagram is a cool little way to sort of, you know, keep an engagement and connection with fans in between the music releases, you know.
You post a video of you trying something out, like a lick or whatever it is.
Here's something that I'm working on for the new record. But the most important thing for me with it is it's just a challenge. Like, I have a limited size on somebody's screen. I have 1 minute. Can I make a cool moment?
Yeah.
I don't want to be, you know, clickbait for someone at a red light. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just going through the news feed. But if they, you know, if that is the case, you know, I don't want to be that. But if somebody like hears something, you know, I don't put very flashy things. I'm not a flashy player, but I don't put very flashy things on there anyway. It's kind of like, if I can give somebody a moment of serenity in the middle of their day, like, that's pretty cool. And that's a platform that allows for that. But it's also good for me to just constantly be practicing. I'll go visit an old riff I haven't played in a while, and I have to practice it and get it up to par to record a video. So that's part of my practicing. So now, like, that keeps me fresh with old material. So, like, I'm trying to find as many benefits as possible with that, without it being the sort of like completely vanity, whatever. Like, oh, this is, you know,
you're just trapped in like refreshing notifications and scrolling, and which is so easy to just stay stuck in that. Like, it really is insane how often. I mean, sometimes I feel like an exception because I never really cared that much about the only I shouldn't say I never cared about social media. I've been on social media forever, using it similarly to you to promote, like, put events. Like, I've always been into event planning, so Facebook was always the place that I used to connect with people, and then you meet a lot of musicians, so you're on it more subsequently from that. But I was never into it for the sake of just, I need to post what I'm doing right now for attention, like that type of thing. Right. So now that I work in social media, it's a little different because now I'm forced to be on it more. So you start to pick up on these triggers that I never really got before. Like I'd be on it a lot in the past, but now so much of it is just knee jerk, and I don't even think about it. Like I wake up and check my phone right before bed. I'm checking my phone. Yes. Like, and those are things I just don't think about. Like, it's just happening subconsciously, and it's really. It's difficult to know how to manage your time, because like you're saying, like I want to go back to something you just mentioned a few minutes ago about the shed that you have to rehearse in. Like, I think that's a big part in any artist. When you have a specialist craft that you want to get really good at, you have to have a functioning space to create in. So like, what for you, like, how did you decide on that space, and what is that process like for you? Just carving the time out of your day to do it, because I think that's like half the battle for people. It's like getting the time and the space to actually sit down.
Well, there's a great quote from Frank Zappa that said, "The true master is not the one who put in the hours. The true master is the one who puts in the hours." And so I was like, when I heard that was years ago, and I was like, well, I need to be just drilling every day. Yeah. And so I would do. Usually I'd be teaching in the afternoon, so like a lot of my morning into early afternoon was kind of my practice time, and that always gets a little bit crazy because you have other parts of life that you have to manage. You have to call the recycle company, you have to figure out health insurance. Yeah. And so then my daughter was born, and my whole life I've never been a morning person. So I've always been like, well, I'd be up early. Like, my wife at that time was doing the standard kind of 9 to 5 thing, and so I'd always get up together with her, and then I'd work. It was just, once we had a daughter, it was not only was it impossible to find the time, it was impossible to find the space, the actual place to do it. So I would, I started waking up at maybe I'll wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then I'd go downstairs to the kitchen table, and I'd get everything down there, and my wife would say, "I'm so sorry, can you try to practice a little bit lighter?" And I'm like, "No." So then we finally realized I needed a space. So I got this Amish shed company to build this kind of prefab shed. It's got, all, nice pine inside. It's insulated. It's whatever. It's just a complete house separate from my house. And I remember Mark Twain, I think it was Mark Twain, had on his property, he had to walk quite a ways to go to the place to go to work, and he had another house kind of thing on his property. And there was something, there was a producer I worked with named Will Ackerman, who also has his whole sort of estate is set up with separate buildings. And there was something I loved about when I was recording with him. Okay, we go here, and then we go to here to record, and then here is where we eat. And I liked having separate spaces. Yeah. So I got this shed, and I realized that not only do I have a new space, I'm going to have to kind of figure out a new way to, a new way to work. And so I was backing off, maybe I'll wake up 15 minutes earlier, and already it was early enough because my whole life I've never been a morning person, and now it's back up. So I wake up at 4.
Jeez. Before the sun comes up.
Yeah, which sounds crazy, but now... So I wake up at 4, and I have this kind of routine. I'll make coffee or tea, and then I have a kind of reading or meditation. And I think it was William Blake said something along the lines of think in the morning, act in the noon, read in the evening, and sleep at night. Yeah. And a good balanced life is that. And so I try to do the best possible, reflection and hard thinking in the solitude of a very early morning, alone in this place that I that I have now, this shed. And so I usually do around 4 to 8 I'll work in there, and so a couple hours of practicing, and I won't do any internet or minimal. If I need to look up something, I will, but I try. On my good days, I'm not checking my phone. I'm not doing anything. I'll just use tab software or composition software. Otherwise I'm just there with my guitar. And that's been a really special thing to actually put in the effort to not only carve out an actual structure, a place to go, but the time to say, oh, I'm not a morning person. Well, I didn't think I would ever drink coffee. I didn't think wouldn't do this. Like, just never be what we're talking on the way here.
Your
like,
brain,
it's very easy to be
neuroplasticity.
stuck. Yeah, neuroplasticity. It's very easy to be convinced you're stuck in certain ways. And, the last probably 5 years of my life, I've revisited all of the things. Whenever I was in a situation, somebody say, "Hey, you want this?" or "Hey, we're going to go get some sushi. Do you want sushi?" I don't eat seafood. I've started to say, "Yes, I'm going to retry it." Right. And now I'm kind of like redefining all the things that I thought I was. I didn't like this. I didn't like this. I was never a morning person. Oh, I was, so it's been kind of cool to like open my eyes on one of those, something fell there, early in the morning to get up, go to the shed and just go to work and just like confront the new every day.
Right.
Yeah,
we were talking about that in the car, just how it's such an interesting thing to think how growing up, you're handed all these assumptions of this is how the world is, this is how you are, this is how your friends are, this is how your family is. And the older you get, you start to realize, well, two things. One, you start to realize that the world isn't the way that you were taught it was, but then also a lot of those things that your parents and the elders and the people in your community said to you growing up about yourself, you start to believe that they're true. And then a lot of people go their whole lives convinced of these truths about themselves that they can't change, that this is in my DNA, this is who I am as a person. And you get in those patterns. Like with something like you're talking about when you have a daughter, that's so interesting because it resonates with me because I am a night owl and I have never been a morning person. Like I have sleep apnea. I've always had bad allergies and all that. Yeah. So like when it comes to waking up, I never feel refreshed. I never feel excited or well rested to get up at any point. Like it's always been a struggle for me. So because of that, I just make the night my creative time. And I often think about what it would take to get me to that point, because I know some people are just convinced throughout their whole lives, like, it's just what I got to do. But
that's
I think,
what I got to do.
Yeah. But we all know people, like my dad was the same way. Like my dad, when he started hustling for what he does now with our agency and everything, like that was all early mornings, late nights. It's like you can rewire those parts of your brain over time. It's just a difficult
I think it's
thing.
figuring out what it is that is the most difficult. So for me, when the moment I would hear an alarm, it would evoke rage.
Same.
and as soon as I'm like, there's no way I'm going to submit to you. You are plugged into a wall. You don't control me.
I can just rip this out of the wall.
Yeah. And so I realized, I was just, maybe it was on eBay or something, and I saw like, those alarm clocks that simulate the sunrise.
Get out. I literally bought one of those for my fiance like a year ago.
I love it. And
it's amazing.
And a clock has one job, to keep time. And this one doesn't do it very well. It was a very kind of like very cheap one. I think they usually go for, $80, $100 or whatever. I bought one that was like $15.
Okay.
Whatever. But a half hour before the alarm goes off, it starts like, opens a light and then like,
it's brighter and brighter.
It gets brighter and brighter. So by the time my alarm goes off, I'm already kind of like having slowly woken up. So I actually realize that I'm waking up in a positive mindset. I'm waking up, not jerked awake. I'm like slowly, my wife hates it because she doesn't want to be up at,
I'm your wife in this situation.
Yeah. So it starts at 3:30 in the morning for me to get up at 4, But now that that was the thing I had to do. I had to change just a little bit and say like, oh, so maybe I can be a morning person. And now that I have that workflow, now I sometimes maybe I'll take a little nap later in the day. But what's great is that I've done really good quality focused work before the rest of the day starts.
Right.
So by the time I walk out of that shed at like around 8 a.m., so I do around 4 to 8, and I watch my daughter a couple days a week when I'm home, and my wife works, then the rest of the day I'm not trying to squeeze in, I got to practice, or I really got to get this done.
Yes.
The thing I have that I push all of what I have to do, that's like, well, I'll return the emails and I'll do the social networking. All of that stuff is I'll just throw it into later in the day.
Yeah.
But that time in the morning, I don't have to worry about when that's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. And I'm a big fan of like not just huge growth, like just showing up with something every day. And I've noticed that in my own playing, if I just wake up I wake up early, I go, I work, and I just keep working at it, just chip away at things every day, and don't have this huge amount of pressure to have to like, oh, I'm still behind. I can't play this thing I've been working on for a little while. It's like I'm always just working ahead, and at 3 weeks, a month, a year, all of that all adds up. Huge. It's huge.
I feel like artists specifically curse themselves in the way of their workload, where you have those allotted periods of time where you know you have to practice, you have to promote, do whatever the mundanities are of the work itself. You have those things, and we tend to just keep piling on other things because like it's part of the artistic, like generally speaking, people who are more artistic are more open, conscientiously. So in that sense, like there's always new ideas coming in, new opportunities, and you overcommit your time to other things. And before you know it, you're scrambling to find those moments of peace and those moments to get the things done that need to get done. And then you find this is a common thread with so many musicians that I know, where they're great people, they're amazing at what they do, and so much of their work falls by the wayside because they get so many things on their plate that they don't know how to manage the things that they need to do. And it's such a difficult process, and it's such a difficult thing to streamline for.
It is, but I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, so I'll just speak for myself. I know that there is a part of me that craves a certain chaos because it keeps me from actually confronting my own work. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? There's a subconscious protection of going to the fragile frontier because I'm constantly rubbing, or just bumping up against the wall of my ability. Or, someday I go and I'm just, it's really not happening this morning or whatever. It's easier to sort of pile on stuff in your life to keep you from that. So all of us, and I don't know if that is the case with anybody else, but I know for me, I have to be really, really aware of what my actual intentions are to really, really just step back and say, okay, why am I afraid of this? Right. Am I resisting it? What am I afraid of? And so there are times where I just don't think. I just march out there and I pick up the guitar and I don't consult whether I feel like it or not. Just do it. And other times I sit and, I have this whole practice kind of routine thing where I plan out what I'm going to do. But I notice that if I take on too many projects, I feel this almost thing in the back of my, maybe I'll feel it deep in my chest or like in the back of my mind of like, this is just, you're afraid to finish that piece. Yes. You're afraid to fail at this, or to feel like, especially if I had a good tour, I come back like, I don't want to go back to all the stuff that's hard to play again, you know?
You were just on a high.
Yeah, but then I force myself to sit down to do it, and I realize that is the thing I love the most, to actually see the progress. But what are the things that I pile onto my life that keep me from that as a sort of coping mechanism or protection? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I can speak to myself that I'm totally with you on that. And so many other artists I know, I feel like there's that natural craving for the chaos because some people think that they need it to drive them to do whatever their craft is. Right. Some people feel like the inspiration you get from anxiety, depression, a breakup, or some traumatic event, like people, or even if it is just like having to disconnect. I think some people literally overcommit themselves subconsciously, intentionally, because they know that they'll have to retract at the end of the week and not do any of it. Right. And then that like isolation is what will inspire the craft. So a lot of people have this weird dance they do with the chaos to use it as some kind of fueling energy, which I'm interested to know because you sound like you've been doing this for so long. You're much more orderly now. You're older, you have a family, so you've developed these sort of patterns to be more healthy in what you do. So like what are some of the ways that you draw inspiration for how you write and what you write about? Because it's a little bit different. Like I hear like throughout this conversation and on the car ride over when you're talking about a lot of this, you reference a lot of like other classic musicians, authors, philosophers, thinkers. And so it's obvious that you have a lot of inspiration drawn from, the greats in different fields. So how does that relate to your music, since it's not lyrically driven, it's all musically driven? So like how do you find inspiration or influence to drive a song when you go to that process?
There's I think it's usually attributed to Mark Twain, but there's an artist, I think it's actually another artist, a painter, but he said, inspiration is for amateurs.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
Real artists just do the work.
You just show up and do it, you
Yeah.
know? And so part of me, you know, I went to school I got my training in theology, philosophy of religion, so I didn't go to school for music. But what was really great, when I was in school, I was in my music classes, and I was studying all of that stuff, and I was just feeling like really not inspired to pick up my guitar, or like, you know, I was consulting my emotional like, do I really feel like playing, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had the opportunity to switch tracks and kind of like almost hand pick a major that was kind of theology and philosophy focused, and I just was ignited by ideas. I've always loved really interesting ideas that make you just like, you have this kind of mental, your brain explodes and you're like, whoa, I don't know what to do with that. That's the point. It helps you become a more enlightened human being. That's what I love about that kind of stuff. And that was sort of inspiring me, or I shouldn't use that word, inspiration, but like making me more excited to pick up the guitar. So like in college, at university, I started to realize that there was this cycle between what I was reading, what were the ideas that got me ignited, you know, just as a person, that just, you know, made my head explode, and how my whole life I've always been channeling my experiences through music. So like if I'm, you know, I did a record a couple years ago when I just decided to kind of revisit some Aristotle, and so I thought that was really interesting, and then I wrote a record around one of those principles from Aristotle, you know, because you know, I can go into it, but
I'm interested to get into that, because
Okay.
it is for anyone who listens to this and listens to your music, the instrumental aspect of it, how you tie in, because obviously there's titles to the songs, there's themes to the music, so it's a different process than most people are used to hearing about for like just a singer-songwriter who's like me. Like, everything is very straightforward. I'm telling you the story of what's happening in my heart, my mind, my beliefs, whatever it is, and it's all there for you lyrically. So how do you do this process?
I still have there are still so much of my music, even though it has a title, it's very open to interpretation as well. But I was really fascinated by Aristotle had this idea called entelechy, and so that became the name of this record that I did. And so he believed that all living things have a sort of a potential or an end inside of them. So like the tree already exists inside of an acorn, and entelechy is the process of bringing something from the acorn to the tree.
Wow.
And so when I was first kind of envisioning this kalimba on my guitar, it was a potential. It was always a potential. And the whole process, the hard work of actualizing, of making it an actual thing, was very difficult. And once I finally got the first kalimba finished, then I was going to write songs for it. And so the whole time I was in this process, I was in the process of actualizing a potential. And so it was a sort of loose connection to the experience. I was reading, you know, that literature, and then I was working on this instrument at the same time, and then these melodies were coming, and I was just struggling with how to form them. And I really wanted to get to the end product of like the final record. Here it is. You know, so I was kind of like in the middle of that principle, you know. So that was kind of one way of how, you know, my reading of something else really inspired something musically.
Spoke directly to it.
Yeah.
Just to clarify quick, did you invent the kalimba guitar, or was that made before you?
The Kalimbatar, there have been different versions around the world of people. Sometimes they'll put like bike spokes or little screwdriver bits or something. But like when I started researching it, it doesn't seem to me like a particularly complex or different idea. Because I was literally trying to find Google whoever did this so that I could ask them questions. What the heck do you do when you run into this wall? Because I had so many, it wasn't working, this wasn't working, whatever. Yeah. And the more I realized that area really hadn't been explored too much.
Wow.
And a lot of the kalimba is a sort of more of percussion instrument. And so I wanted a good melodic possibility with the kalimba on the guitar, and then, you know, all the crosstalk between those. So yeah, that was.
So you basically innovated this thing. Do other people do it now? Like, have you seen, is it more common, or are you still the sort
there's
of...
a few people would reach out with videos or that they've bought pre-made kalimbas and put them on their guitars and did some really beautiful stuff. I'm working with a company to mass produce that. That's kind of like another new venture, so that you can make, and then I have like a method book series, or like interactive lessons to help people get started on the Kalimbatar. But I didn't initially want to go that direction, because I just wanted it. Again, it's part of my exploration in sound. I'm not like trying to be a Kalimbatar.
Yeah, you weren't like an innovator. Like, you're not like the Elon Musk of kalimba. Your guitar.
Yeah, I was just like, I didn't hear what I quite wanted, so I made adjustments. But this was always my love of sound. Back to like when I played that movie theme on the piano, it got me excited because I love that sound, and I was recreating something that I had heard. So it was part of that process, So my next record will be no kalimba. It's a totally just guitar. I'm excited to kind of get back to that a little bit. But
cool, man. Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm also interested to know, like, kind of going off of the idea, like, you were talking about Aristotle and going through like the thought process of what it was to you, what you were going through in life, how that translated into the writing that you were doing at the time, and how you can use that tension between the two. Yeah. So I'm interested to know, like, we don't have to go deep into this if you don't want to. It's just something I generally like to ask. I know it's something that's on a lot of people's minds. They don't have many outlets to, I guess, produce the thoughts into. Whereas a lot of artists now, you're seeing, just with how crazy the world's been, which we talked about a little bit in the car too, like how, there's so much chaos going on around the world, and it's an interesting time for artists. I mean, it's similar to like civil rights era in the sense where like music is starting to reflect a bit about like the times, and it's interesting how certain artists are using their platforms in some way or another to enact some type of social voice or social change. So is it something that's interested you, or is it something that's played a part at all in the platform that you've developed, or do you like to keep your sort of personal ideas and identity separate to the stories that you tell through your music?
That's a really good question. I feel somewhat of a hesitation to want to like just jump completely into my music should be this social thing, or I'm going to give everything and I'm just kind of like the bleeding heart. Because
you lose something when you do that. When your music becomes just about the social cause, it's no longer an emotional thing that everybody can connect with. It automatically becomes something divisive to a degree. So
I think music for me has always been the way that I process being human. And so if there are things in that work that do resonate with other people in a certain social time at any point, if it's happened or if it will happen, I'm not in control of that, and I don't want to write for that. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But what's happening now in the world, what happened 10 years ago, what's happened, I'm always internalizing that. And so there's a lot of that kind of weird tension that goes in. So it's a part of it, but I'm not writing specifically for that.
Right.
I don't want to write, and I can't, because no one's going to sing an instrumental. I'm not going to write an anthem for an anti-Trump rally or something like that.
But it is interesting to hear. Like, so it is similar in the sense of just like that story you told before about how you were reading a lot of Aristotle's work in the time that you were recording those pieces, and that's sort of how it fit in to that. So it almost could be subconsciously working itself in, since it is a part of your mind space right now. So it's working itself into some capacity.
I think maybe a better example, just because it's more fresh, a lot of my next record, I've been really toying with this idea that maybe it's just because entering my 30s, I'm looking back at my life and I'm looking forward, and I'm thinking, whatever my life will be, I have to be the one to be really aware of what the common threads are, because it's easy to do your day-to-day, morning, night, you do this, you pay your bills, you do yours, I don't know why I'm fixating on recycling, but you set up recycling,
it's a thing.
It's a thing. But what I love, Coltrane would do this, Bach does this. If you look at a Bach piece, the first time I noticed this, I was in high school. my teacher said, okay, look at this melody that Bach does. And he goes right up a scale. And then he said, now look at all of the next measures that come after that. And when the first measure was up a certain scale, and then the first note of every measure from there was also the scale that he first introduced. So that meant that there was different layers of melody going on. So sometimes the melody is blatant and it's right there in front of you. Sometimes the theme is actually outlined. Maybe it goes to the bottom voice, maybe it goes to the upper voice, or maybe it's every other note. Like you have to sort of investigate what are the common themes that who you are, so I've been thinking about that a lot. And my daughter growing up, and there's just nonstop, massive moments that hit you. It's up to me to try to thread those together into a life narrative. And so a lot of my songs that I'm exploring now are like a lot of notes, but tying in themes throughout them. So when I went to China last year, and I had a beautiful, beautiful experience, and the language, I was trying to pick up on it, and it was just complete chaos. But there was something so beautiful about it. And so I came home from that experience, and I was, learning a little bit more and just trying to get better at it. And so I called this piece Beautiful Chaos. And it has kind of like these really weird rhythms and something that you don't quite get. But then as the piece emerges, all of the melody starts to come together. And so then you realize that what feels like chaos at first is actually part of, a whole overarching theme that you didn't see before,
Right.
So that's kind of a way now that I'm like, what I'm going through in my life, and the experiences that I've had, how do I actually put them into music? And if someone listens to it, like maybe they can, they might not pick up on that. They may, or, I'm not sure. But for me, it's been really fulfilling to take a life experience, and then when I finish a piece to be like, yup, I got it. Like that feels exactly what I was trying to express. And that feeling to me is there's nothing like that in the world,
That's so important, man. 'Cause, it's especially I forget who said something about this. It's probably a podcast I was listening to at some point recently where they were saying you remember, like throughout your life, you remember something like less than 1%.
I've heard that's crazy.
Of everything, which is so insane to think about. Like when you think from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep each day, and all the things that you do throughout that day, like the little. Like, you get in a little fight with your wife, you get, something bad happens at work, maybe you ate something bad for lunch, you get sick, or even you get excited about a new promotion, whatever it is. There's all these little things that happen throughout any given day, and 10 years from now, you're probably not going to remember any of them. So you remember the points that stand out, like what are these moments of the story that you're trying to tell, like you're saying this trip to China, where you can formulate a theme and you can formulate pieces around it to actually make it stand out a little bit, like make an event,
absolutely.
make a part of you stand out, which is so important, I think, because so many people, it's like the cliche where like some people wake up when they're 40 years old and they think, where did my life go? Like what have I been doing? And I think that can happen so easily when you get caught in these rhythms of, like you're saying, you wake up, you take the recycling out, you make your food, you go to work and all that, and without really, it's not about accomplishments, and it's not about how popular or good you are at something. It's more about, I think, taking the time each day to really relish in certain moments and and reflecting on how they're shaping who you are. Like what are some of these defining points and chapters? Like you keep going back to kind of the story theme of someone's life, which is really, I think, such an important way to look at life as a whole,
and to not just see someone's story as their highlights. Like we see our stories as one of our accomplishments, I've done this, and this, I'm always trying to figure out what is the overall theme. Like I remember when I was a kid, I went to our town library, had this guy, astronomer, came and set up these telescopes, and you could look at stars and look at Saturn. And, I looked through, and I remember that feeling of, wow, like, that's cool. And I got the chills, and I was like a little kid, and I didn't have the language to know, like, this is the cosmos, and we are a part of it, and we're, whatever. And just a couple weeks ago, it was raining outside of my and it stopped raining like late at night, and right behind the shed, I went in there for something, and I looked out over the field, and it was just covered in fireflies. It was just absolutely covered in fireflies, and I got that same feeling. I remember when I was a kid, like, well, this is really cool. There's like this sparkly, and it was awesome. And I remember having that thought, like, this is a moment that I can't capture it. It's not going to show up on my camera. I can't share it. I can't post it. I can't and it's, if I said to somebody else, like, yeah, I just saw some fireflies, it'd be like,
whatever.
Okay, But I'm convinced that finding meaning in the mundane is really the only way to not wake up a bitter 80-year-old man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you create your whole life narrative around highlights, well, I think like every day choosing to find those little things and remembering, I was, as a kid, I looked through a telescope and I was really excited about something. I don't want to lose that feeling. Like, I want to continue. I experienced something very real at 6 or 7 years old. It's not, I was a kid. How can I keep that sort of curiosity alive now? And then how do I trace those moments to know that when the alarm clock goes off at 4 a.m., then I'm like, I'm excited to continue to find more of those moments today. And I'm going to go to my guitar and see if I can find and continue to express them.
Yeah, it's such a weird thing how we have to use certain frameworks to define who we are. Like, we have to use labels to define who we are and what we do in some capacity. But when you actually boil someone down to their identity, it's funny you brought all that up, because I think it was the third maybe episode of this podcast I did with my friend Nelson Floyd. That was one of the central themes that we talked about the whole time, was this sort of like, how do you balance your personal identity and then your brand identity? It's like what you do.
Totally.
So you're a musician and you're a songwriter and all these things, but that's not who you are. And and it is this weird, like, even with this very podcast, like when I publish this podcast, I've done an intro, and in the intro I'm describing who you are, and I'm going through Trevor Gordon Hall. He's done this, he did that, he is a songwriter for this, he's been featured here. Like, you go through those highlights, because those are the things that
I guess it's an introduction or something.
Yeah, we like the label. Like, we like, the label helps us categorize and helps us realize, like, okay, this is what this person does. This is maybe I'm interested in that. But when you actually boil a person's identity, I think people get lost in that process of the identity of someone as a brand, whether that's their work or whatever it might be, that makes up the whole person, which is where you get lost in the sauce, where it's just like, it's not who you are. And like, even someone listening to this, it's easy. It's always an interesting thing for me to consider from the outside looking in, because I'm listening to you speak about this thing that you do that you obviously love, and it takes up such an integral, big part of your life, and you're so successful in it. So it's interesting for me thinking about the outside looking in, how there's some people who would hear someone like you giving off this story, and they would have this thought like, oh, like I couldn't do that, or that's crazy, like that's like his whole life. Whereas here we are at the end of the conversation, you kind of boil it back down to none of the themes that you're talking about here, none of the process of getting to where you are now has ever been about this, great accomplishment or this great, like, lofty goal at the end of the tunnel type of thing. It's more these small pieces along the way that define who you are and make up your identity and make you happy, like make you not just happy, but a fulfilled person. Like it's easy to get lost between those two things. I think sometimes
there's a great thinker in France who said that most of the misery we experience is assuming that happiness is a state that you attain, and that is entirely incorrect. And he said that happiness is a moment. It's something that happens to you. And I think it's important to sort of like lay the groundwork so that you can be as receptive as possible to those moments, but it's never something you can attain. And so a lot of life is sort of the everyday mundane things, and then moments will just happen, and they come and they go, right? And don't try to hold on to them. Don't try to control. You can choke the potential of something by being too controlled over it. So I think that happiness is something that I'm very happy when it happens.
You're receptive to it.
But I guess I would just encourage anybody, like, that sort of frees up any personal relationship you have, any job, anything. Like, they will not make you happy. They will in moments, but they will not be the things that will make you a state of happiness, nothing can. And so that really puts you back into the dirt and dig your feet and your hands into the earthiness of what is your life on a day-to-day basis in mundane moments. And sometimes you'll have really big accomplishments from those, and sometimes it's like, it's good to just wake up and like remember what the wind feels like early in the morning and look at fireflies, like that to me is more true to life. And that those being more receptive to those moments and trying to craft my life as best I can to be receptive to those moments are what actually help me accomplish other things. That makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, did you see that movie that came out a couple years ago called Room?
No.
It won a bunch of awards, this whole thing. I had never even heard of it until I saw it on Netflix last night. And
oh, nice.
You got to check this out. My fiance and I watched it. It's phenomenal. It's a very emotional movie. You don't watch, it's not like let's just watch a movie type of thing. You want to make sure you're in the right state of mind when you go into it. But what I loved about this movie was, and I don't ever talk about movies on this podcast, but it really struck me to what you're saying here, where most movies about the theme, so like the whole theme of this movie was, it starts you out, this girl is with her son who's 4 years old, and they're trapped in this room, probably about the size of this one, like an 8x10 type of thing. And the storyline is that this man kidnapped her and was just raping her for years. And then she eventually had a kid, birthed the kid in this room, and raised this kid. So she was, I think it's like 6 or 7 years total. She was in this room. And the movie, like the premise of it is her plotting the escape to get out of the room. So it's spoiler alert. She gets out of the room. Of course, it's like how these movies tend to go. But what's so great about the movie is that with all these types of these types of themes that you find in movies, usually it's all about the escape. It's all about, okay, the girl got out, happy ending or sad ending, whatever. But like as long as there's closure to that part of the plot, this movie, that's only half the movie. So then the second half of the movie is all about getting readjusted to life. Yeah, it's like, how do you deal with the trauma? And not just the trauma, but the mundaneness of life. Like it goes through her going back to her family. There's all this family drama, and like obviously she's dealing with internally, like how like her son now has all these like toys and everything you could imagine, but it's not making him happy.
Right.
And there's all these moments, and the acting is incredible in it. It's an amazing, amazing movie. Definitely check it out. I hope I didn't spoil too much of it. It's mostly about the drama of what's going on, but. Yeah, that's something that's the part of the story that I feel like never gets told. People like the success. They like to hear, like they like to get to the end of the movie or the story, and it's like we have the conclusion, everything's all good. There's like that happily ever after feel that we all grew up with Disney and everything. Whereas this was such an amazing depiction of it doesn't end after you get through this thing.
I think that when I did that record in Teleki, that was one of the lessons, like sort of live between the acorn and the tree. I wanted so bad the whole time for me to get that finished product.
You wanted the tree.
I wanted the tree. I wanted that finished CD. I wanted it done. And what I loved so much was what I realized at the end of it, like what was most valuable was just the process in between. Yeah. So I was living in Teleki. That was that process.
And that's what you wanted the whole time. You said no, you wanted it. You feel like you're driven by the final result, but it's the journey is the destination type of thing.
Whenever I see that, you see that on, like if you go to the shore and you see that on like, those wall hangings,
the cliches,
whatever. And I look at it, and sometimes I'm like, you know what, that's a cliche for a reason, and I hate the way that's worded. If you reword it a little bit, it'll sound fresh, and someone will think you're brilliant for
Right.
But I really do think that like the other. Like in the Zen Proverbs, like the obstacle is the path, and those. I just love that because I think that really forces you, again, to go back to your life, and you will not find meaning in any possible series of highlights if you can't find it in the mundane.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it,
it's
man.
just the way it is,
That's it. This has been a blast.
So much fun.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Of course.
Before we jump out of here, is there anything, I know you said you're working on this new record. Is there anything you're working on you want to plug or throw in?
I have a new solo record that's in the works, and then I'm releasing a record with this a guy named 1403. His name's Tom Cameron. His artist name's 1403 from London. That should be coming out sometime soon. And then I'm doing like duos and trios with a couple guitar players. I'm launching a new tour with Will Ackerman. He started Windham Hill Records back in the late 70s, and had all my childhood idols on that label, and so we're kind of relaunching a concert series, and we're doing a record of that this year. So I guess in general, just if you're interested in anything I've said or did, like, follow me on any.
Is there
of
one
those.
that's better? Like, is it Facebook or mailing list?
I'm trying to do
do
the Instagram thing, because I think that's just a more fun way to keep in touch.
There
but
you go.
like, I have the website, trevorgordonhall.com. I keep all the tour dates on there. I have a bunch of tour dates coming up this year. So if you're out there, or you know what, I'll do this. The best thing nowadays is Spotify. I am 100% on the Spotify thing. So just go to Spotify, type in Trevor Gordon Hall. That's
cool. We didn't even get to talk. I was gonna bring that up at one point.
I know,
it's
that's
like
a
what
whole
you thought
other
about
thing.
Streaming. That's like a
but
whole.
I am totally in favor of it. So
there you go.
There we go.
All right, cool, man. All right, thanks again, Trevor.
Got it.